Ladies and gentlemen of the media, good afternoon, and we do apologize for the slight delay in the start of this press conference. This press conference was called at short notice to update the public of what has the new development in terms of the opposition's anti-vaccination campaign. I have with me two of my colleagues, Dr. Frank Anthony, Minister of Health, and I also have Minister Joseph Harmon, who is the Minister of Labor. The APNU+AFC opposition is certainly at it again, trying to destroy Guyana in their desperate attempts to remain relevant following their spectacular defeat at the March 2020 elections. Only this time, they are heartlessly attempting to score cheap political points using the national COVID-19 vaccination drive intended to save lives as a weapon against Guyanese. Clearly, as was evident during their failed attempt to steal the elections, Joseph Harmon and his delusional APNU+AFC confederates do not care and are not concerned that they are putting the lives of their supporters and other Guyanese at risk. With regard to the COVID-19 vaccine, you now hear, you now have actually the opposition leader, Mr. Harmon, being called out on the APNU+AFC Anti-vaccine whisper campaign. He's then forced to publicly urge his supporters to take the vaccine. He then discredits the process by which the vaccines were procured and is now using that to cast doubt on the efficacy of the vaccines. This is a bold-faced resumption of his anti-vaccination campaign. Harmon and all his colleagues in the leadership have taken the very vaccine he is now casting doubt about, but he is prepared to use his supporters as collateral in his quest to score political points. The People's Progressive Party Civic Administration views this treacherous and anti-vaccination campaign by Harmon and the opposition as a direct attack on the safety and well-being of all Guyanese. Further deaths from the COVID-19 virus will be on the shoulders of Joseph Harmon and the APNU+AFC opposition. I now invite the Honorable Dr. Frank Anthony, Minister of Health, to give you a presentation. Then we'll have Minister of Labor, Joseph Hamilton rather, to give you his take on this matter, and then we'll open up to the media for questions. I now hand you over to Dr. Frank Anthony.
Thank you very much, Minister McCoy and my colleague, Mr. Joe Hamilton, members of the media. First of all, allow me to say thank you to all the persons who have, over this last 15 weeks, been working with us on the vaccination campaign. Indeed, because of their efforts, as of yesterday, we have 224,853 persons who would have received their first dose vaccines. This represents 46.2% of our adult population receiving their first dose of the vaccine. We also had, because of these efforts, 94,243 persons who are now fully vaccinated. This represents 19.4% of our adult population. Vaccination is a very difficult process because when we get vaccines into Guyana, to ensure that people get it around the different regions, we have to maintain cold chain and we have to make sure that it gets out into the region in a timely manner and then taken in various containers to be administered to people across the country. And despite these challenges, we have been able to get vaccines out to our people. As you're all aware, there's a global scarcity of vaccine, and efforts by countries to access vaccines have been very difficult, to say the least. As of this week, the WHO estimates that just about 2.2 billion persons would have received vaccines globally, which represents a very tiny fraction of the world's population. We in Guyana, we have been fortunate to be able to access vaccines because we had a number of arrangements that we would have put in place. This includes working with multinationals such as COVAX. And through COVAX, we were promised 20% vaccines for 20% of our population. However, because of the challenges that COVAX would have experienced, we have not received full 20% as yet. We have also worked with bilateral partners such as China and India, and they have donated vaccines to Guyana. We have also had a small donation from Barbados, which we returned by giving them 5,000 doses of vaccine. We also had arrangements that we made with manufacturers of vaccine, such as Sinopharm, and of course, we were able to obtain the Sputnik V vaccine through a supplier. But in all of this, we had also reached out to other manufacturers, such as Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and of course, we have been talking to a number of companies in India and China to try to access vaccines. When we spoke to Pfizer and Moderna, which were the first set of companies that we approached, they told us in no uncertain terms, because they had supply issues, that their preference, and they already had contracts in place with developed countries, and therefore they would not be able to give us those vaccines before 2021. We had set ourselves a mission that we want to get our population immunized. And so to reach herd immunity, we would have to get at least 500,000 persons immunized in Guyana. So the only options that we had available was for us to secure vaccines using China, India, and Russia. We have approached the Russians directly through the Russian Sovereign Direct Fund, and unfortunately, they weren't able to guarantee a timetable of when they can deliver these vaccines. And so we then went through one of the suppliers for these vaccines, and we were able to access these vaccines. Now, having gotten these vaccines, we started our program here in Guyana, and the numbers that I told you earlier, that's where we are to date. Now, what has these vaccines done for us? These vaccines, once you're fully immunized, we're able to prevent persons going into the hospital, meaning for them to be, they don't get really sick with COVID, they don't get the severe forms of COVID, and because they're not getting the severe forms of COVID, they're not going to be in the ICU, nor are they going to die from COVID. You would recall, as of today, we have 441 deaths already. And we know for sure that by using vaccines, it would prevent these deaths. That has been our experience here. That has been the experience globally. So earlier in the week, we had in Parliament, when the government went to get the contingency fund for vaccines, I had a series of questions that were leveled at me pertaining to the cost of vaccines. And I was asked how much money we spent on these vaccines. And I said it to the National Assembly, how much money we spent on the vaccines, how much money we paid. And somehow that became an issue. But we have not had this price as a secret price. This was known. We have said this many times before. The president spoke about it. The vice president spoke about it. I have spoken about it on many occasions before Parliament. So it was clear to the general public how much money we were paying for vaccines. And the rationale here was that we wanted to have access to vaccine because vaccines are going to save people's lives. And once we can get access and we can immunize people, it means that we are protecting them. And just contrast that for a little bit, that it would cost maybe about 5,000 Guyana dollars for us to buy the doses of vaccines for a person. And compare if somebody gets sick and they come into the hospital, what it would cost for us to keep that person in the hospital and take care of them. The medicines that we are using, some of them cost almost $100 per vial. In other instances, if you are in the ICU, you would require at least 15 liters of oxygen per minute, and that's a lot of cost. And plus, of course, we have to take care of people with other amenities. So per patient in an ICU, it costs us millions of dollars. And what we are trying to do here by providing vaccines is to make sure that people can have access to vaccines in a timely manner and therefore prevent infection and prevent deaths from COVID-19. So having spoken about that, the opposition sought to make a lot of noise about the price of vaccines. And we were very adamant that we wanted to have these vaccines. And the government of Guyana, in the interest of the people, was willing to buy these vaccines to make sure that people have access to them here. Similarly, when we spoke to Sinopharm in China, Sinopharm, we were able to access 100,000 doses at $15 per dose plus another $3 for transportation. So that becomes about $18,000 a dose. Now, Mr. Harman, during the debates on Monday, referenced some documents that said this vaccine probably you can get them at $10 or $8. And I got up and asked him, I said, can you point us to where we can get these vaccines at this cost? Because we have tried to negotiate with these companies and we weren't able to get it at those costs that he was talking about. And he himself admitted that he had no source that would be able to give the vaccines at the prices that he was quoting. And therefore, while they made that an issue, I did not see it as an issue because these vaccines are going to keep people safe. It is going to save people's lives, and it is going to protect people and prevent them from getting into the hospital and dying from COVID. And if $5,000 is the cost of preventing that, then we as a government, we are happy to spend that money to protect people. But today we had a press conference that moved now from pricing to something that is absolutely bizarre. I would want to venture to say it was reckless and irresponsible of the leader of the opposition now to call on people, in a sense, not to take the vaccine because, as he thinks, the vaccine is fake. Now, Mr. Harman is not a medical person. Mr. Harman probably doesn't have much clue pertaining to anything relating to vaccines. Yet, Mr. Harman decides that the vaccine is not safe. He hasn't produced any evidence that the vaccine is not safe, hasn't produced any evidence that the vaccine is not working, but proceeded to make a conclusion that the vaccine is fake. And based on his analysis that the vaccine is fake, has called for us to suspend the use of the vaccine in Guyana. Well, since he hasn't produced any evidence and there's nothing to go by, and of course he is not a medical person, why should we bother with him? But we have to bother with him because Mr. Harman represents a political party and he probably has some amount of following. And unfortunately, what he is instigating them to do is not to take the vaccine and to put their lives at risk. And this is quite unfortunate for someone who is in the leadership position to take such a stance and to deliberately endanger people in this country. We know that Sputnik V is one of the most effective vaccines that you have on the global market. Sputnik V, the trials, the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trial, the data for those trials was published in one of the most prestigious journals in the world, that is the Lancet Journal, and the results are there for the whole world to see. The efficacy of the vaccine was deemed, when it was published in the Lancet, at about 94.1% or something like that. Then, with population data that came in, Sputnik V has now been rated at 97% efficacy. So there's no doubt about the efficacy of the vaccine. There's no doubt about the safety of the vaccine. This vaccine works. And more recently, this vaccine has been working against all the variants that we have seen so far. And many of the studies that have been done has shown that this vaccine is very effective against different variants of coronavirus. Yet, without any scientific evidence, we have the leader of the opposition pronouncing on the vaccine being fake and that we shouldn't use it in Guyana and we should discontinue its use until he, Harman, had a chance to verify whether this thing is fake or not. Well, we are not going to stop this process. We are going to continue to use Sputnik V vaccines because it is safe. Right now, as I speak, this vaccine is being used in 74 different countries around the world. And it has been given emergency use authorizations in these countries. Millions and millions of doses have been utilized around the world. There have been no adverse effect from this vaccine. Of course, like with any other vaccines, there are side effects, such as a little pain at the site of the injection and maybe some fever and headaches and so forth. But within 24 hours, all of that would subside. And we have seen it, like with the other vaccines, we have seen it with this vaccine. Mr. Harman then went on to question the capacity of our Food and Drug Administration to authorize the use of the vaccine. And apparently he's not aware of the laws that we have in this country, which means that no medicine, no vaccine can come into Guyana without the explicit authorization of the Food and Drug Administration. The Food and Drug Administration had independently assessed the various types of vaccines that are available globally and would have made an independent decision that these vaccines are safe for use in Guyana. And the ones that was authorized include Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Sinopharm. It also
recording in progress
of Covaxin, and of course, Sputnik V. And so we have, when we as the ministry wanted to import these vaccines, we had to go through a process of applying to the Food and Drug Administration to get their permission so that we can import these vaccines. All of that has been complied with, and that's how we have brought in these vaccines. Now, one would want to say that the Food and Drug Administration here does not have the technical capabilities of analyzing the vaccines. And one of the things that the Food and Drug has been doing, and not just for vaccines, but for medicine, is to use something called reciprocity. And that is if there are more stringent regulatory bodies that would have analyzed and utilize and examine this particular product and found it to be safe, then we take those findings and we accept them here in Guyana.
And so for those vaccines, we look at one, if it is manufactured, where it is manufactured, if it is used in that country, then that's acceptable to us. If a stringent authority has approved it for use, then that is acceptable to us. And if in Latin America, there are key countries that we have a collaboration with, such as Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and in Central America, we have Mexico. If these countries have approved it, then we also would be able to utilize that data for approving it here in Guyana. We have looked at all of this, and as you would know, that in many countries in South America right now, Sputnik V is being used. It is being used in Brazil, in Chile, in Argentina, and in many other Latin American countries. And based on what the FDA found in those countries, it has authorized it for use in Guyana. So there's no issue with safety. And so Mr. Harmon, who being a non-medical person claiming that these vaccines are fake, then we should not take him seriously. And it's important that we do so because the statements that he has made is made in a very mischievous way because it can easily undermine our vaccination program. We are on target to get to herd immunity. However, we have encountered vaccine hesitancy. And there are particular communities in Guyana where we have seen an increase in that hesitancy. So for example, in Region 1, as of today, first dose, we are at 55.9%. In Region 6, we are at 54%. But in Region 10, we are at 14%. Region 8, we are at 28%. And therefore, there are particular areas in our country where there's pronounced vaccine hesitancy. Instead of Mr. Harmon pronouncing on the quality of vaccines, which he knows nothing about, he should be able to go out there and encourage people to take their vaccines. Unfortunately, he's not doing that. And by not doing that, he's putting people in harm's way. Because if people are not vaccinated, if people are not immunized, unfortunately, if they're exposed to COVID, they can get this more severe form of the disease. They can end up in the hospital. And ultimately, if they don't get better, they can get into the ICU and perhaps can die. We want to prevent deaths. I think every right-minded Guyanese would like to see the deaths in our country goes down. We want to see less hospitalization. And for us to accomplish that, then it means that each one of us must encourage people to take their vaccine. And as a responsible opposition, they should be out there encouraging people to take their vaccine. Unfortunately, over the last 2 to 3 days, we have seen public statement by the leader of the opposition that they are against, in many ways, what is it is implying that they're against vaccination, they're undermining this program, and therefore, you know, by extension, they're putting a lot of Guyanese in harm's way. We have to hold them accountable. We have to, because none of us in this country is going to be safe until all of us are vaccinated. And if we have a opposition that is going to be behaving in such an irresponsible manner, then we have to hold them to account. Because this is not going to help this country. This is not going to help the people of this country. And I hope that all right-minded Guyanese would condemn this kind of behavior by the leader of the opposition and those in the APNU and AFC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anthony. We'll now hear from Minister Hamilton.
I will be very brief and allow the questions to flow, but what I can say to the public is what Harmon has said today is what was being said on the under the bottom houses. So all that has changed is the where it is being said. We were aware that some of the hesitancy that Minister Anthony spoke about, that came about by Harman and leaders of the APNU+AFC putting doubts in the minds of people about the importance of taking the vaccine. And as Minister Anthony stated, we moved from questioning the price of vaccine to discussing the efficacy of vaccine by a non-medical person. And importantly, in his presentation, it was saturated with lies because he spoke to fake vaccine in Mexico and he called a number, 200,000. That's a blatant lie. The conversation and the report about fake vaccine in Mexico was less than 6,000. So how do you take these people seriously when they could blatantly come before the public and lie like that? And this, you can fact check it in seconds, but they have no shame. And so it is not about medical science. It is not about public health issues. This is straight destructive politics. That is what is happening here. It is a set of people in the opposition who have tried different methodologies to obstruct the government program. The last one before this, they have jumped on now, is the whole issue about racism and ethnicity, trying to fan the flames. They have utilized the flood to make allegations that are racist in nature. And, you know, we have made a point that who knows, I don't put it beyond these guys that the next conversation of the vaccine is about discrimination of vaccinating people. These are the type of characters. They have no shame. I am predicting that might be the next conversation, just like how they have deliberately attempted to mislead Guyanese people that the COVID grant and the response to the flood was not being done taking the care of all Guyanese. I want to believe that one of the plans they will hatch very soon, and he will speak to, is attempt to indicate that there is some discrimination in the rollout of the vaccine. And who knows, Minister Anthony, he might use the same numbers that you just used, you know, to make that point. So I am counting on the Guyanese people and their wisdom in this matter. And as Minister Anthony indicated, all the evidence suggests that vaccination is the best way out of this problem. And therefore, the government will continue to inform and to educate persons and to continue this program and to have the people who are involved in it. What Armand should have been doing is complementing the medical staff.
Yeah, exactly.
A responsible opposition leader. He should be seeking to push the government to do more for the medical staff if he really can. But that is not his concern. His concern is straight politics. It is attempting to sow the seed of discord, attempting to create confusion, attempting to slow down a government program. That is what he's doing. Straight politics, nothing about the thing Minister Anthony spoke to. He has no clue, no understanding about the matter. They just go out there and speak a lot of trash talk. And as Minister Anthony says, we have to answer. And that is the reason why we're here today, to respond to this garbage so that it wouldn't catch on to the Guyanese public.
Thank you very much, Minister Hamilton. And as you know, from the inception, the government of Guyana, the PPP government, has been very open and transparent about the efforts to procure vaccines, and have also been said by the president of Guyana Dr. Irfan Ali, the vice president, and Dr. Anthony himself lamented on the fact that we were making efforts to procure vaccines and the prices of those vaccines. I now open up for members of the media to ask their questions. The usual protocol will apply where you identify yourself and media house and then proceed to ask your questions. So while we await, also it seems though
Yes,
someone
Minister,
attempting.
Minister Anthony, that is Shabral, Damara Waves News Talk Radio. Sir, could you give us a little bit of background information? Having encountered all of those difficulties in acquiring vaccines from other countries and other brands, how is it that you bumped into contact with the Sheikh from the UAE as a source? Who referred him and how did you verify whether in fact he was an authentic source of good vaccines?
So as I said before, we looked at a number of options. And in fact, we have spoken to not only the UAE, but we also spoke to people in Kuwait pertaining to vaccines. We spoke to the Organization of Islamic State to acquire vaccines. We spoke to people in the EU to try to get vaccines, and plus those countries that I mentioned, China, Russia, and so forth. When we had the discussions with the Russian direct investment, they said to us that they have suppliers that they would normally work with. And one of the suppliers we understood to be the Sheikh, and therefore, since he had authentic access to vaccines produced by Gamaleya, when we engaged them, they said they can supply Guyana with vaccines. And therefore, we negotiated and we have vaccines through this particular supplier.
Okay. I think Nazima Raghaber is trying to get through.
Thank you, Kwame. Thank you, Kwame. Good afternoon, Minister Anthony. Were you appraised of the supplier's history of vaccine accumulation prior to this? Does he have one? And sir, at any time, would you or the ministry share whatever information that can be shared on the tests that the Food and Drug Administration have done on the vaccine? On the vaccines, sorry, I'm not limiting it to this one. Thank you.
So again, starting with the last question first, and that is the Food and Drug Administration relied on reciprocity for all vaccines. We don't have the capacity to check the active ingredient in any vaccine here. And therefore, we relied on reciprocity. When I said we, the Food and Drug Administration. And that is why I explained that we can use basically 3 tiers of reciprocity. The first one being from a stringent regulatory authority, those, for example, like the United States, Canada, UK, Australia, and so forth. Then you have the tier where if it's WHO approved, then the third tier, which would be in Latin America from one of the countries, say Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, or one of those countries. If they have investigated and given emergency use authorization, then we can use what they have done. It must be recalled also that when the United States started using Pfizer and Moderna, it was not approved by the WHO. And these particular vaccines, up to recently, Sinopharm was not approved by the WHO. It is only about a month ago that Sinopharm has been approved. And they have been listed going through the process at the WHO.
The same with Sputnik. It has been listed and it is going through that process. And Gamaleya estimates that within about 2 months period, that Sputnik V would be approved by the WHO. At least that's what they're looking at, the time frame. But these things take time, apart from reviewing all the theoretical documents which the WHO has. They normally would go and visit the manufacturing plant where these vaccines are being manufactured and satisfy themselves that it meets the good manufacturing process and so forth. So all of that the WHO is engaged in. But in the meantime, countries decided that they want to have access to vaccines, and therefore 74 different countries in the world has now given emergency use authorization for Sputnik V, and they have been utilizing it. So that's there. In terms of whether there's a track record of the Sheikh dealing in vaccines and other pharmaceutical products, my understanding is that the company has a track record of dealing in pharmaceuticals and medical products, and they're a global company based out of Dubai. And therefore, they have been able to supply, and we have accepted those supplies. We have a contract with them, and so far they have been delivering on that contract.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else?
Gordon Mosley, News Source. Good afternoon, ministers. Minister Anthony, good afternoon to you. Sir, I know you give us a breakdown of the number of people fully vaccinated against those who have received that first shot. Can you give us a breakdown of the number of people fully vaccinated by each of the vaccines that we're using in Guyana? Of that 90-something thousand?
I don't have those numbers here, but we can certainly work on that to get that up. But just to say that the initial set of Sinopharm vaccines that we had was 20,000, so we have used most of that up, and most persons would have already received their second dose. So you can estimate that of those persons who have been fully vaccinated, at least 9,000 to 10,000 of those persons have received Sinopharm. And the others would be a mix of the Sputnik V and the AstraZeneca vaccine.
And sir, I was asking the question because based on a statement that came out of your ministry last evening, it said Guyana procured 400,000 doses of Sputnik vaccines, and that so far we have received 305,000 doses, and we're now awaiting the arrival of 95,000, which means, based on what you've said previously, that we take 200,000 of the first dose and 200,000 of the second dose, based on the vaccine being two different vaccines, so that's Sputnik. So I'm trying to figure out if we only have 95,000 of the Sputnik outstanding, why then is there a shortage of Sputnik vaccines right now? That's that second dose, when we should, based on the numbers provided by your ministry, we should have adequate a number of that in stock right now.
So the second dose that we have used that up. And right now, that's what we are short of, the second dose. So we have made those arrangements to try to get those second dose in as quickly as possible, because there are a number of persons who have received their first dose and are now waiting for the second dose. And we are hoping to rectify that as quickly as possible.
But can you say how many of the second doses we have received so far? How many of the second doses are in Guyana were accepted?
I don't have that number, but I can get that for you. Maybe in tomorrow's COVID update, I can try to get that number for you.
And finally, from me, sir, I know many of these vaccines come with a pretty short expiration date. Could you say whether the ministry has had cause to get rid of any of the vaccines because they have passed an expiry date?
No, we haven't had that challenge. And you're right that some of the vaccines that we did receive had very short dates, especially those that we received from COVAX. And we have been utilizing it and making sure that we utilize it within the time frame.
we hadn't had a challenge of throwing away or giving away any of the vaccines that we received. We have been utilizing those vaccines. We do have, on occasion, wastage of vaccine. And you would recall that in one instance, we had a team that went into guns. They took in, I think, 216 doses of vaccines to guns. Unfortunately, on the occasion when they went in, not a lot of people took the vaccine. And because it rained and no aircraft could have gone back in to pick them up, we weren't able to get dry ice into that team. And the rest of the vaccines that they didn't utilize basically spoiled. So we do have on occasion, and in this particular case, we have spoilage, but we haven't had cases where vaccines expired on us and we had to dump it. We didn't have that.
And sir, quickly, in terms of the cost, I know you explained all of that with the cost of the vaccine, but I've noticed based on what you said in the National Assembly, the cost of the Chinese Sinopharm vaccine is much cheaper than what we were paying for the Sputnik. And I've noticed also that Trinidad, they have been able to source a large number of that Sinopharm vaccine after Guyana started our vaccination drive. So could you explain the hiccup that you might have experienced in getting the Chinese vaccine and why the preference for the more expensive Sputnik?
Well, it's a couple of things. First of all, we concluded the arrangements with Sputnik earlier. And then as we were evaluating, we needed to have more vaccines. So we then approached Sinopharm to try to get access to additional vaccines. And that's how these negotiations go. So you have multiple things going on at the same time. And we are trying to get as much vaccines as possible into the country to make sure that our vaccination program is on target. And that's what we've been doing. So we have not confined ourselves just to AstraZeneca or Sputnik V or Sinopharm. We have been looking at various options. You would also know that we've been working with the African Union through the CARICOM initiative to access vaccines. They have been able to get access to Johnson & Johnson, and so we are going to get some from them. We actually made a down payment for those vaccines. We are waiting on an estimated time of arrival for those vaccines to come into Guyana. So we have opened up multiple channels to talk to different producers of vaccines, and whoever can give us those vaccines, that's basically what we're working on. We still haven't closed any negotiations with Pfizer and Moderna. We still have those open, and we engage them periodically to see whether or not those options can become available as well.
But again, sir, Guyana shares very close ties with the Chinese. The Chinese were the first to make a large donation of vaccines to Guyana. So my question remains, with Trinidad and Tobago now sourcing large amounts of that Chinese vaccine that is now WHO approved, why did Guyana choose and is still paying for Sputnik over that Chinese vaccine? Why are you going more for Sputnik, 400,000 doses, as against a very small number of the Chinese vaccine that is much cheaper?
We already had paid for the 400,000 doses of Sputnik. We had already paid for it.
So why was there any...
It's now delivery. And by the way, up to about a month ago, the Sinopharm vaccines was not approved by the WHO. So this thing about Trinidad now saying that they have access to these vaccines, it's only recently that they have concluded those arrangements to access Sinopharm vaccines. Because prior to that, they didn't do anything. When we got the first set of Sinopharm vaccines, it wasn't approved by the WHO at that time. But we knew that it was in the process of getting that approval. And based, again, on the efficacy results and the tests and the countries giving it emergency use approval, that is why we went ahead with that donation. And so when we look at the numbers of vaccines that we have received, and we saw a shortfall, we engaged them to get the additional 100,000 doses.
And that's how we concluded those arrangements and signed that contract to get an additional 100,000 doses from them.
But again, sir, why the preference for that Sputnik vaccine initially? Because clearly Guyana, as I said, has close ties with China. You can get it direct from the supplier in China, as you've been doing since. So why was there that initial preference for Sputnik that would make you go ahead and order 400,000 doses of this Sputnik vaccine as against the Chinese vaccine?
I don't want to compare between Chinese and Russian vaccine or AstraZeneca, but if you want to go down that road, let me explain something to you. Efficacy of vaccines. AstraZeneca, if you use it with an interval of 4 weeks, it is 62% efficacious. If you use it for 12 weeks, it goes up to about 82%. If you the Chinese vaccine at 4 weeks interval, it's 79%. The Sputnik V at a 4 weeks to 12 weeks interval, it goes up to 97% efficacy. So technically, this is one of the best vaccines that you have. And based on the technical merits of the vaccine, that is why it became a preference for us.
But are you concerned that even with that you've just explained the efficacy, that the World Health Organization, where we're following all of their protocols and everything with regards to them, they have approved the Chinese vaccine and they're still to give approval to the Russian vaccine, even with the efficacy figures that you've put out there?
I'm telling you that they have, go on the World Health Organization website, you'll see they have a list called emergency use listing. You would see the Sputnik V vaccine is going through that process for approval. They have substantially completed the process. They have maybe a hearing or two more to complete that process to get approval. Similarly, the Chinese vaccine went through that process and they got approval about a month ago. So it's not like these companies who are making these vaccines are not undergoing the process, but it takes time. And there's the WHO takes time to schedule who they're hearing, when they're hearing, and all of that. So I am convinced that the vaccine would eventually get approved. And I'm so convinced about the technical merits of the vaccine that I myself took it. My family took the vaccine.
Okay, is there any other member of the media wish to ask a question or question?
Minister.
Yes.
Guyanese critic for the Break News. In light of the ministry's work, the effort the ministry has put in to educate Guyanese and ensure working towards herd immunity, and the actions by the opposition to create what could only be seen as public terror if evidence of the accusations are not brought forward. Has the ministry or is the government going to be looking at holding persons accountable, since this is not just an ordinary matter of money not spent well or some form of corruption, but one that creates public terror and could cause loss of life to Guyanese?
I hope that we have a lot of right-minded citizens that are going to look at the evidence before them, make an analysis, and make a determination on what to do. I keep repeating, it is really unfortunate. It is totally irresponsible for the leader of the opposition to take the position that he is taking and that of his party. I do sincerely hope that they would reconsider that position, because to be honest with you, if we are going to beat this pandemic, we need everybody on board. We cannot have vaccine hesitancy in Guyana, or else we're not going to get out of this pandemic. We are not. And we really, really need to set our differences aside and make sure that people take their vaccines.
if there's any one national issue that we have to come and be on board with, it is this one. Because all of our safety depend on each one of us taking this vaccine. Without that, our country would be at risk. All the good things that we want to do, whether open up, I hear people want to go to parties, people want to do this, people want to do that. We would not be able to do it. And then if you remain unvaccinated, there is inherent risk of getting the infection, of going into the hospital, of dying from COVID. You also have other complications where, as we see on almost a weekly basis, there are new variants of this virus that is emerging and circulating, and these variants can have various levels of disruption, creating more cases. They're more infectious, they cause more hospitalization, more deaths, and everything else. Our only way out of this and to prevent those things from happening is that we got to immunize people. And therefore, with whatever vaccines we have to utilize it to make sure that people get these vaccines quickly, they're fully immunized, so that we can protect them. And when each one of us are protected, then the population as a whole would be protected. And that's what we have to work on. It is a simple thing. I know a lot of you in the media have been doing an extraordinary job. And I want to thank all of you who have done that, because you have actually been out there on a daily basis, encouraging people, talking to people, influencing people to change their mind. And that has helped us tremendously. And we would really want to thank you for that, because without your efforts, perhaps we wouldn't have had so many people coming forward to get their vaccines. So I really don't want us to be derail this vaccination process. And I really hope that we can have some sober-minded people in the opposition that can really think out these things and make sure that they do the right thing. And people ought to bring pressure on them too, asking them to do the right thing. We are, if it's an issue of price and all of that, there's different mechanism, and we have gone to the parliament, we have shown you what we have paid for it, and we are open for scrutiny. Scrutinize it. That's why we went there. That's why we put all the numbers there. On Monday, it's the first time I think anyone had to spend so long on the floor to answer all the questions. And most of you probably would have seen, I spent nearly 2 hours answering every single question that the opposition asked of me. I did not hide any information. Some of it was very, they would keep repeating themselves. And I gave them all the information, all of the information, in the hope that we can then get on with it and that we can have a collective arrangement where we can be talking to people with one voice to encourage them to get vaccinated. That's what we have to do right now. It's really an important national issue, and we shouldn't be divided on this. We shouldn't be casting doubts on the efforts. You know how many professionals they have in the ministry that is on a daily basis going out there to make sure that people are immunized? Some of those people, their work starts at 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning, to go there and prepare vaccines and to make sure it's shipped out to the different parts of Guyana. And then you have other teams that go from 8 in the morning, spend sometimes till late in the night, just trying to get people immunized. And in all this flood, and so people are still going out, going with boats to these far-flung communities to make sure that people are immunized. Let us give those people some credit. Let us appreciate their efforts. They are working hard to keep us safe. Let us value that effort and also do our part in encouraging people to take those vaccines. It's really important for our country. I don't know what else to say. I honestly don't.
Is there any other question? Any other members of the media?
Yes,
Okay, sure.
Minister. Dr. Anthony, can you take us through the departure, transit, and arrival period and places for the Sputnik V vaccines that have arrived so far in Guyana?
So when vaccines come to Timeri, we are able to pick it up from the airport. Normally, we have to take up a refrigerated truck to pick it up. These vaccines have to be stored, first of all, on its way coming to Guyana. They have to be at temperatures lower than -20. And once that is maintained, that cold chain is maintained, we pick it up from the airport. Then we move it to the 2 bonds that we have centrally in refrigerated trucks. So we either store some at our facility in Diamond or at Kingston. And then from there, we redistribute to regional hubs. And through the regional hubs, we then have containers that can maintain -20 that we take it out to the villages. To do that with those containers entails that we maintain the cold chain at -20 if it's Sputnik V vaccines. If it's the AstraZeneca and the Sinopharm, well, then it's the regular temperature, which is 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. So our system originally was geared for vaccines between the 2 to 8 temperature range. But during this period, we had to build capacity for -20 and even beyond -20 for the ultra cold, because we were preparing for Pfizer's vaccine, and we do have the capacity to deal with -70 vaccines. At our central bond, we have several freezers that can keep ultra cold temperature, which we have bought during this pandemic to make sure we have that range of storage for vaccines. So that's basically how we would collect vaccines from the airport, move it to the different hubs, and then be able to get it out to people.
I really wanted to know from which country the vaccines, the Sputnik V vaccines left. Did they transit other countries, and how long they spent before arriving in Guyana?
So the vaccines would move from the manufacturer in Moscow to the UAE, and from the UAE to Miami, from Miami to Georgetown. Many of the movements from Miami to Georgetown is by jet that is normally hired to bring these vaccines in. And in a lot of cases, that was the sole cargo that came in, these vaccines.
So did they overnight or spend any more than 1 day in Miami, for instance?
I don't have all those details.
Okay, thank you then, ladies and gentlemen of the media. Thank you for joining us, and particularly at such short notice. I would like to remind the importance of us making sure all that we are vaccinated, and to encourage those around you, as the government has been making every effort to ensure that they make the vaccines available and that our citizens are protected by these vaccines, by taking the vaccines. And it is a continued effort, and it is an effort that requires all of us to be on the same page, to be saying the same things, and to be able to avoid the trouble of joining anyone or any group who seek to undermine the vaccination program of the government of Guyana. You can rest assured that your government is working for you and in your interest. Dr. Anthony, I'd like to thank you very much for joining for this press conference, making yourself available, and Minister Joseph Hamilton as well. Members of the media, thank you once again, and you can join us anytime. Well, in fact, I would like to say that Dr. Anthony would love to have your questions. If they could, other questions, if you may want to have further clarification at his ministry. So thank you, and God bless you all.
Look down through your window, no big city lights, just greenery. I don't know what you come for. Listen up, my dear, we're such a man free. Welcome to the land of many faces, not one, not two, but 6.